My name is Dana, and I'm the marketing coordinator here at Stroshine. We are a boutique elder law firm located in St. Charles. We have 7 attorneys in our office who focus in wills, trusts, powers of attorney, long-term care planning, guardianship, veterans benefit planning, and Medicaid applications. Today, we have Stroshine Law Group's certified elder law attorney, Linda Stroshine, to speak about the Illinois Trust Code and how it could affect your state plan. Before we get started, I would like to review a few items with you before handing things over to Linda. The information provided by Stroshine Law Group is general in nature and is not intended to be legal advice, nor does it constitute a legal relationship. Please consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation. Linda, I think we're ready for you. Welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Dana. This is such an interesting topic and so timely. Um, you and I, Dana, were talking about how you remember in the early days of the pandemic, the Illinois Trust Code had just come into effect January 1st of 2020. I know you weren't there, but I was sitting around the conference room table with several of my colleagues here probably about like February, right around Valentine's Day, saying, okay, what are we going to do with this new ITC? How are we going to roll this out? How are we going to tell our clients? And of course, we had a plan that day, which then got derailed not even a month later when the shutdown happened. So we do think that a lot of folks don't realize these changes have been made. And so that's part of the reason why we're going to go over the Illinois Trust Code today. So you can decide for yourself whether you do need to make any updates to your estate plan. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit of overview on the Illinois Trust Code. And I'm going to call it the ITC. That's a little bit of lingo that we use, but I think that's easy enough to follow along. But again, the effective date of the ITC, January 1st, 2020. So we did have this major shift in how trusts are drafted and implemented or administered in Illinois that a lot of people just weren't paying attention to because we had bigger issues on our plate in January of 2020. The Illinois Trust Code is based on the Uniform Trust Code. So why is that important? There's a commission or a committee that looks at laws as a whole. So you know that there's federal laws like federal tax law and all sorts of federal laws, immigration, things like that. And then there are state laws like divorce, right? So the federal government doesn't have anything to say about your divorce or my divorce, right? Because that's just a state of Illinois issue or another state. And so this Uniform Trust Code Committee or Commission, they get together and they look at certain laws and say, what's important? Where are the laws? Where would it be helpful for the laws to be consistent or more consistent from state to state, right? In the past, let's say, more than 30 years ago, we were a pretty stable society, meaning we didn't move around as much as we do now, right? Our parents and our grandparents, I don't know about yours, but mine, they were in the same house for 40 years. My grandparents, even longer than that. They just didn't move around as much as we do now. Okay. And so that Uniform Trust Commission says what laws should be more uniform throughout the states, like between Illinois and Iowa and Indiana, where should we have some similarities? And trust law is one of those because I see it with many of my clients. We might live here in Illinois for a while and then we move to another state and then maybe another state after that. And it can be difficult to keep changing our estate plan time and time again. And so Uniform Trust Code was the big set of rules that this commission said, we'd like to see more states get on board with this more uniform set of laws. And so Illinois did that as of January 1st, 2020. There are 36, 36 other states who have done that, or maybe Illinois is part of those 36. And so it's, again, making it easier when we move from state to state so that we don't have to completely upend our estate plan. And this really is a broad application. So this Illinois Trust Code or ITC applies retroactively to all those trusts created, even the ones before January 1st, 2020. So there was a hard line in the sand saying, okay, from here on out, we're going to be following the Illinois Trust Code rather than the Trust and Trustees Act, which is what we had before the ITC code came in. All right, so some key changes in the ITC. We're going to talk about notice requirements. So just different rules that are in place as how a trust is administered and who gets notice of what. There are some changes to beneficiary rights, especially with regard to remainder beneficiaries. Some rules on terms of how do we modify a trust, or even can we modify a trust, and then the decanting laws. And I know that sounds like a concept with a red or a white wine. You'll see how it applies here to trust code in just a few minutes. So with regard to the notice requirements, so trustees under the ITC, they're now required to share certain information with what's called a qualified beneficiary. A qualified beneficiary is a current beneficiary and what we call a presumptive remainder beneficiary. Okay, so big concepts here, but what are we talking about? If we are talking about my trust during my lifetime, I am the current beneficiary. And maybe my spouse or my adult children are what's called presumptive remainder beneficiaries. We presume that my husband or my children will become a current beneficiary after I pass away, right? So there's two categories of those beneficiaries. And basically, trustees need to notify the people who are qualified beneficiaries within 90 days of that trust becoming irrevocable. There's also a couple of other key terms here where if the trustee changes, so let's say I'm still alive, it's my trust, so I'm still the current beneficiary, but for whatever reason, I pass on that role to be trustee. And so the new trustee, Dana, let's say that trustee is you, then you would have to notify me, my husband, and my children as presumptive remainder beneficiaries that this change has happened. And the idea is just to make sure that whoever is involved with this trust in whatever way has the information that they need. Okay, so the other key factor here is trustees need to provide an annual accounting of what's going on in the trust. So again, if I'm still alive, but Dana's managing my trust as my trustee, she needs to tell me how that money is being managed. Or if I've passed away, Dana's still my trustee, she needs to tell my husband, my children, how that money is being managed within that trust. Okay, there are some exceptions to that rule. If we drafted your trust differently, we can certainly cut off some of that information, but that's what the basic rule says. And then keeping in mind, these rules apply even to trusts that we consider to be previously silent. Like if a trust previously said there was no information to be given out, that this new Illinois Trust Code does apply. All right, so let's look at the expanded rights for remainder beneficiaries. So the remainder beneficiaries, remember in my example, if I'm still alive, remainder beneficiaries are my husband or my children. Under the ITC, those remainder beneficiaries, they now have a right to trust-related information. So again, an accounting notice about what's going on with the trust. The remainder beneficiaries can request a copy of the trust. In the past, and I had this happen when I was representing a beneficiary. This was probably 15 years ago. I was representing a beneficiary and they were entitled to a specific gift. Let's say it was $50,000. And I actually don't remember, but let's say it was 50,000. And so I wrote a letter to the attorney representing the trustee and said, my client's a beneficiary. I'd like a copy of the trust. And instead of giving me all 50 pages of the trust, they sent me a redacted copy of one page of the trust, that one paragraph that said, so-and-so beneficiary is entitled to $50,000. I said, well, that's great, but that doesn't help me see the big picture, like what's going on with this trust, or is there anything else in that trust that my client was entitled to? So nowadays, trust beneficiaries are entitled to a full copy of the trust. And again, the accountings. So as a beneficiary, whether it's a current or a presumptive remainder beneficiary, entitled to copy of the accounting to show what's going on in the trust. And this kind of makes sense. We're going to talk about how that does impact some families, but if let's say this is a second marriage, the second spouse is let's say the husband's passed away, the second wife is the current beneficiary at that point, but then the husband's children from first marriage are the presumptive remainder beneficiaries, right? they might be okay with the second wife managing this money and using it for her benefit, but they want to make sure it's being used properly. And so, again, the idea with the ITC, more transparency so that those beneficiaries can know what's going on. So, how does this impact those family trusts? Again, sub-trust notification requirements. What does that mean? So, surviving spouses serving as trustees must now provide formal notification to the children who are remainder beneficiaries within 90 days. Right. So, this can't go on forever and ever. We have a 90-day requirement. And when it comes to blended families, just like I mentioned, the idea here is more transparency so that all beneficiaries who are or will be entitled to something can see what's going on just to make sure it's being managed correctly. There are some privacy concerns because a lot of the families that if I'm working with a couple who've been married, first and only marriage, maybe they've been married for 40 years and they say, yep, the kids will get this money once we're both gone. But we actually don't want those kids looking over the survivor's shoulder and say, Mom, you're doing it wrong. And so understanding there are rules we have to follow here, but there are ways, legitimate ways around it if we want to cut off certain beneficiaries from receiving information. Okay, so it's not, we just have to know what the rule says so we know how to draft around it. Okay, speaking of trust modification, how do we do that? What if there are some necessary changes to this trust that we really need to address? Well, when it comes to trust modification, we could go into court, which is actually 2 and 3, right? The court change circumstances. The court can modify trusts in certain circumstances, or the trustee, the courts can also review trustee compensation. So we definitely still have the court's involvement if we need it. But number one is let's start, if there is a change, let's try to do that outside of the court. That's called non-judicial settlement. And that makes sense. Non-judicial meaning outside of the court, settlement meaning agreement within the parties. So if we can get everybody on the same page that this part of the trust needs to be changed, we can do that privately without going into court. So, and then there's some changes to the decanting laws. And initially, this sounds kind of funny. Like, why would we be talking about wine in a trust situation? I'll get to that part in a minute. But basically, the Illinois Trust Code allows trustees the ability to expand or transfer, make changes to a trust document which is otherwise irrevocable. And so, how this relates to decanting wine is because with decanting wine, you're taking wine from one bottle and you're putting it into the second bottle with the idea of making that wine better, right? That's the whole idea of a wine decanting. The same concept applies in trust decanting, where maybe something in the law has changed, where the trust I originally signed no longer meets its purposes. So we decant my original trust to a second trust, much like the bottle of wine goes to the second bottle, to make the trust better. So there are some requirements here. Decanting, instead of going into court, we can decant a trust. There are rules that set out how we specifically do that. We have to give the beneficiaries 60 days notice of going ahead with that decanting. And if the beneficiary doesn't file something with an objection within 59 days, it's going to go ahead. So we can get into the nuances, but just understand that there are legitimate ways of being able to slightly adjust a trust, even when it's otherwise, it seems impossible. Okay, so what do we do now? First of all, we're going to review existing estate plans. So we have identified 3 steps here. So take a look at your documents. I usually tell clients if we have, once you sign your estate plan documents, you should look at them every 3 to 5 years. If you, most cases, people don't look at them that frequently, but if it's maybe 7 to 10 years by the time you get around to it, that's probably okay. But it's important to take a look at your documents now because these rules have changed fairly significantly. So look at your documents, talk to your attorney. Now that might be us, but it might be a prior attorney, and that's okay too. I want you to speak with someone who you feel comfortable, review your documents, and see if there are any changes that need to be made to your documents. And then maybe looking at the terms of the instruments, right? As a layperson, you might not understand all the nuances in the trust, and that's okay. That's ultimately what you hire your attorney to understand for you. But it is a good idea. Thoroughly review your documents, evaluate whether you need to make any changes. And when it comes to adapting to this Illinois Trust Code, again, we see that there is enhanced flexibility within this new law. It does require, maybe require is too strong of a word, but it's important to take a look at your estate plan and documents to see if there are any updates that need to be made, because the ITC, or that Illinois Trust Code, does fundamentally change how those remainder beneficiaries are treated, whether they get information, whether they get financials. There are some changes to this Illinois Trust Code, and if you haven't already looked at your documents, you should consider doing that. The Illinois Trust Code really does represent the most comprehensive trust reform in decades. And when it comes right down to it, what we're talking about is protecting what matters. Your estate plan centers around your loved ones and your goals, as it should. And these are the plans you have for your family after they're gone, or not after they're gone, I'm sorry, after you're gone. And if we need to update the documents, we should do so going forward. All right. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to us. You can certainly come by the office, give us a call, go online. Dana, any final thoughts on that?
No, just thank you for sharing this really helpful information today, Linda. Just to echo what you were saying, if you do have any questions as to how this will apply to your individual situations, we always encourage you to give our office a call and schedule a time to speak with our attorneys. So as always, thank you for watching, and we wish you well.